On January 4th, 2019, a 23-year-old mother of four walked into a bar in Lexington, Kentucky. Hours later, security cameras captured her leaving with three men. It would be the last confirmed footage of her alive. Her name was Savannah Spurlock. That night did not begin as a headline. It began as something ordinary. A young mother, navigating stress, separation, and an upcoming court appearance, wanted a brief escape. Friends described her as overwhelmed but hopeful. She had recently given birth to twins. She was working through personal challenges. She needed a break. As the investigation unfolded, detectives focused heavily on timeline reconstruction. Every minute between 2:30 a.m. and sunrise mattered. Investigators mapped movements using phone data, vehicle activity, and witness statements. In cases like this, consistency becomes critical. Even minor contradictions can reveal larger truths. Brandon Lewis and Isaiah Thompson maintained that Savannah was alive when they left the Lancaster property. They described her as intoxicated and asleep. Their cooperation included allowing access to phones and providing detailed statements. Detectives compared those statements against digital records. David Sparks's account, however, grew increasingly difficult to reconcile with physical evidence. He claimed Savannah woke later that morning and left his home voluntarily, but no confirmed footage showed her walking away. No phone pings placed her elsewhere. No witnesses reported seeing her after that night. In missing adult cases, investigators often consider voluntary disappearance. Financial activity, transportation records, communication logs, these elements can signal intent to leave. In Savannah's case, none of those indicators appeared. Her bank activity stopped. Her phone went silent. Her responsibilities at home were abruptly abandoned. The silence became evidence in itself. As forensic teams processed the Lancaster residence, small details began forming a pattern. Blood evidence suggested a violent struggle had taken place. Analysts worked methodically, documenting stains, collecting fibers, testing materials. Science often speaks quietly, but its conclusions are difficult to dispute. Meanwhile, the community's emotional response intensified. Savannah's mother, Ellen Spurlock, became the public face of the search. She gave interviews. She organized efforts. She refused to let the case fade into obscurity. Her determination kept media attention alive during months when no visible progress seemed apparent. National outlets began covering the disappearance. True crime forums dissected timelines. Online discussions debated theories, but investigators remained focused on verifiable facts. The journal discovered inside Sparks's home added another layer. In its entries, he described fantasies of control and harm. He wrote about urges that reflected a deeply troubled psychological state. Detectives consulted experts to understand the significance of those writings. While disturbing, journals alone cannot convict. They must align with physical proof.
Where is he?
And physical proof was mounting. Surveillance footage showing Sparks loading large trash bags into his truck became a focal point. Investigators traced the truck's movements using available data. They analyzed the timing against his statements. Discrepancies narrowed the investigative lens further. Months passed without public confirmation of Savannah's location. For her family, each day stretched endlessly. Hope existed, but it grew fragile. Then came the discovery in June, when Sparks's father contacted authorities after finding remains buried in the strawberry patch. The case shifted from uncertainty to confirmation. Forensic teams secured the area. The process was careful and deliberate. Evidence recovery in outdoor environments requires precision. Soil conditions, weather exposure, and time all affect preservation. Identification confirmed what investigators feared. Savannah had never left that property alive. The burial site's proximity to the residence contradicted Sparks's earlier claim that she walked away. Forensic analysis connected materials from the scene to items inside his room. Packing tape recovered matched a roll found at the home. DNA evidence placed Savannah inside his personal belongings. Confronted with these findings, legal pressure intensified. Prosecutors prepared for trial. The evidence was largely circumstantial at first, but forensic links strengthened the case. Eventually, David Sparks chose to plead guilty rather than proceed to trial. In court, the gravity of the situation was unmistakable. A young mother's life had been taken, a family permanently altered. The judge imposed a 50-year sentence. For the legal system, it represented accountability. But justice and healing are not the same. For Savannah's children, milestones would arrive without her presence. Birthdays, school events, graduations. Her absence would echo in quiet moments long after headlines disappeared. The case also prompted broader conversations about vulnerability. Savannah's intoxication that night became part of the public narrative. Some discussions drifted toward judgment. Others emphasized awareness and safety. Responsible storytelling requires balance. acknowledging context without assigning blame to the victim. The responsibility for violence rests with the perpetrator. Cases like this challenge communities to examine how quickly trust can be misplaced. They highlight how ordinary social interactions can conceal risk. They underscore the importance of bystander awareness, especially when someone is heavily impaired. Yet hindsight is always clearer than real time. To those present at the bar that evening, nothing appeared extraordinary. There was no visible alarm, no obvious danger. That is often what makes these stories so unsettling. Harm does not always announce itself loudly. It begins quietly. The investigation's conclusion did not erase lingering questions. Why that night? What internal factors drove the decision? Psychological assessments can offer insight, but they cannot restore what was lost. What remains is memory. Savannah Spurlock was more than a case file. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend. Her life contained complexity, struggle, love, and responsibility. Reducing her to the final hours of her life would miss the larger truth of who she was. Her family continues advocacy work related to missing persons awareness. They speak about vigilance, communication, and support systems. They encourage others to look out for friends in vulnerable situations. Awareness cannot undo tragedy, but it can influence future choices. True crime stories often focus on mystery. This one ended with conviction. Yet its emotional weight persists because of what it represents. An ordinary night, a decision that seemed routine, a drive down a dark highway, and a home that became the site of irreversible harm. Security footage captured the beginning. Forensic science confirmed the end. Between those points lies a reminder that circumstances can change without warning. Savannah's story forces difficult reflection, not only about criminal behavior, but about prevention, about community, about responsibility to protect those who may not be thinking clearly in a vulnerable moment. The legal chapter closed with a sentence. The human chapter continues. Lexington's nightlife was alive that Friday evening. Music filled the bar. Conversations overlapped. Laughter masked private worries. Savannah arrived with friends, blending into the crowd like anyone else seeking distraction for a few hours. At some point during the night, she and her friends met three men: David Sparks, Brandon Lewis, and Isaiah Thompson. By all visible accounts, it seemed like a typical social interaction. Drinks were shared, conversation flowed. Nothing outwardly alarming appeared in the footage later reviewed by investigators. As the night progressed, Savannah became heavily intoxicated. Friends would later say she was not thinking clearly by closing time. When the bar shut down in the early morning hours, cameras captured her walking out alongside the three men. The timestamp read, approximately 2:30 a.m. The footage shows her moving steadily, not forced, not struggling. To anyone watching without context, it looks routine. People leave bars with new acquaintances every weekend. There was no obvious sign that anything was wrong. But what happened after that walk out the door would unravel into a months-long investigation that would shock Kentucky and draw national attention. Instead of heading home, Savannah agreed to continue the night elsewhere. The destination was not another bar. It was a private residence nearly 40 miles away in Lancaster, Kentucky. That decision changed everything. The drive from Lexington to Lancaster takes roughly an hour under normal conditions. Rural highways replace city streets. Streetlights thin out. The landscape shifts from commercial buildings to open farmland and isolated homes. By the time they arrived at David Sparks' residence, it was approaching dawn. According to later statements provided to law enforcement, Brandon Lewis and Isaiah Thompson claimed that Savannah eventually went into a bedroom and fell asleep. They said they left the property around 6 a.m., leaving her there with David Sparks. From that point forward, only one person could account for what happened inside that house. David Sparks would later tell investigators that Savannah woke up later that morning and left on her own. But there was a problem with that claim. She never returned home. When Savannah did not contact her family, concern escalated quickly. She had 4 children. She had responsibilities. Her sudden silence did not fit her usual patterns. Her mother, Ellen Spurlock, sensed something was wrong almost immediately. A missing person report was filed. At first, authorities treated the case as a disappearance involving an intoxicated adult who may have left voluntarily. These situations are complex. Adults have the legal right to leave without notifying others. But as hours turned into days and days into weeks, the absence became alarming. Investigators retraced her final confirmed movements. They reviewed security footage from the bar. They identified and questioned the 3 men seen leaving with her. Brandon Lewis and Isaiah Thompson cooperated with law enforcement. Their accounts were largely consistent with each other. They admitted to being present at the Lancaster home but maintained that Savannah was alive when they left. David Sparks' version of events centered on the claim that she departed later that morning. Detectives began examining physical evidence. Surveillance footage from near Sparks' residence showed him loading large trash bags into the back of his truck hours after the other two men had left. The timing raised questions. If Savannah had simply woken up and walked away, why would there be activity involving large bags that same morning? What was inside them? Where did he go afterward? These questions shifted the tone of the investigation. Law enforcement obtained a search warrant for the property. Inside the home, forensic teams began carefully documenting what they found. They located blood evidence inconsistent with the explanation provided. The quantity and placement suggested a violent event had occurred within the residence. It was no longer just a missing person case. It was a homicide investigation. During the search, investigators discovered a journal belonging to David Sparks. Within its pages were writings that deeply disturbed detectives. He described violent fantasies and self-professed psychopathic tendencies. The language revealed a mindset preoccupied with domination and harm. While journals alone do not prove guilt, combined with physical evidence, they painted a troubling picture. Meanwhile, Savannah's family lived in agonizing uncertainty. Community members organized search efforts. Volunteers combed through wooded areas and fields. Flyers bearing her photo appeared in storefronts, on telephone poles, and across social media platforms. Time passed. Winter turned to spring. Spring turned to early summer. Then, 6 months after Savannah disappeared, a break in the case came from an unexpected source. David Sparks' own father contacted authorities after discovering human remains buried in a strawberry patch on the family's property. Forensic testing confirmed the identity. It was Savannah. The discovery brought devastating closure. It also solidified the evidence chain investigators had been building for months. Forensic analysis linked materials found at the burial site to items recovered from Sparks' residence. Packing tape used in the crime matched a roll found in his room. Savannah's DNA was located on items connected to him. Confronted with mounting evidence, David Sparks was arrested and charged with murder, tampering with physical evidence, and abuse of a corpse. The legal process moved forward. Facing overwhelming forensic proof, Sparks eventually entered a guilty plea. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. For the justice system, that marked the conclusion of the criminal proceedings. For Savannah's family, it was the beginning of a new reality. 4 children would grow up without their mother. Her case ignited conversations about vulnerability, accountability, and the dangers of trusting strangers while impaired. It raised questions about bystander responsibility. Could someone have intervened earlier? Could a different decision have changed the outcome? These are questions that cannot be answered definitively, but they remain part of the story. Savannah Spurlock's disappearance began as an ordinary night out. It ended as a tragedy that reshaped multiple families and communities. Her story is not just about crime. It is about trust, about moments that feel routine until they aren't, about how quickly circumstances can shift when judgment is clouded. Security footage froze her final public steps in time, but what followed happened in private, behind closed doors, far from cameras and crowds. And in that silence, a life was lost. As the courtroom proceedings concluded, attention slowly shifted away from legal arguments and toward impact. Sentencing provided accountability within the justice system, but it did not answer every emotional question left behind. In cases involving violent crime, there is often a divide between legal resolution and personal closure. One can occur while the other remains distant. For investigators, the case represented months of meticulous work. From security footage analysis to forensic testing, each step required patience and precision. Modern investigations rely on layers of evidence: digital records, physical traces, behavioral analysis. No single element stands alone. It is the convergence of details that builds certainty. In Savannah's case, that convergence was clear. The timeline reconstruction showed opportunity. Surveillance footage contradicted statements. Forensic findings supported the prosecution's theory. The journal revealed a mindset consistent with violent capability. Combined, these factors formed a narrative strong enough to withstand legal scrutiny. Yet beyond the courtroom, conversations about prevention continued. One recurring question centered on vulnerability in social settings. Alcohol lowers awareness. Judgment becomes clouded. Situations that might otherwise feel questionable can seem harmless. Advocates emphasize simple protective habits: staying with trusted friends, sharing location details, ensuring safe transportation. These measures are not guarantees, but they reduce risk. Another discussion focused on bystander responsibility. When someone appears heavily impaired, intervention can matter. A friend insisting on a safe ride, a stranger speaking up, A bartender recognizing signs of danger. Community awareness functions as a shared safeguard. Still, responsibility ultimately rests with the individual who chooses violence. True crime narratives sometimes unintentionally shift attention toward victim behavior. It is essential to avoid that distortion. Savannah's decision to leave a bar did not cause the crime. The deliberate actions of another person did. Understanding that distinction protects both fairness and clarity. The broader impact of the case extended beyond Kentucky. Media coverage amplified awareness about missing adult investigations. It demonstrated how quickly digital evidence can become central. Security cameras, phone data, and forensic science now play decisive roles in resolving cases that might once have remained unsolved. At the same time, technology can only capture fragments. Cameras recorded Savannah leaving the bar. They did not record what happened inside the home. For that, investigators relied on physical science and careful questioning. The strawberry field where her body was discovered became a solemn symbol. Fields typically represent growth and harvest. In this case, it marked concealment and grief. The contrast is difficult to ignore. For Savannah's children, the passage of time will reshape memory. Some may remember her voice. Others may rely on stories told by family members. Photographs will preserve moments that words cannot fully describe. Legacy often survives through those who carry it forward. Her mother's advocacy efforts ensure that her name remains associated with awareness rather than silence. Speaking publicly about pain requires strength. It also transforms tragedy into a platform for prevention. In examining this case, patterns emerge that are common in many violent crimes. Isolation, opportunity, a moment where oversight disappears. These factors, combined with an individual predisposed to harm, create conditions where tragedy unfolds rapidly. It is unsettling because it feels avoidable. But prevention is complex. Human behavior cannot always be predicted. Trust is woven into social interaction. We meet strangers, we form temporary connections. Most of the time, those interactions are harmless. It is the rare exception that becomes catastrophic. That rarity is part of why cases like this gain attention. They challenge assumptions about normalcy. They force reconsideration of everyday choices. They remind us that danger does not always announce itself with obvious warning. Savannah's story also illustrates how persistence shapes outcomes. Her family's refusal to stop searching kept momentum alive. Media coverage sustained visibility. Investigators continued working through months of uncertainty until evidence surfaced. Without that persistence, resolution might have been delayed further. The plea agreement concluded the legal process more quickly than a full trial would have. Some families prefer trials for the public airing of evidence. Others choose guilty pleas to avoid prolonged proceedings. There is no universally correct path. Each family navigates grief differently. What remains consistent is loss of presence, loss of shared experiences, loss of a future that once seemed certain. As time moves forward, the headlines fade, courtrooms empty, news vans depart, but the quiet spaces remain, the empty seat at a dinner table, the absence at holidays, the memories replayed privately. Those spaces define the lasting impact more than any sentencing statement. For viewers watching this case unfold, reflection may follow, awareness may sharpen, conversations with friends may change. In that way, stories like this can influence behavior indirectly. They become cautionary reminders rather than distant headlines. Savannah Spurlock's disappearance began with a timestamp on a security camera. It ended with a conviction and a sentence measured in decades. Between those points lies a chain of decisions, evidence, investigation, and accountability. The truth was uncovered through persistence and science. But the cost was irreversible. As we close this timeline, what remains is not just the memory of a crime, but the memory of a life. A young mother navigating challenges, a family seeking answers, a community confronted with harsh reality. Her story serves as both warning and remembrance. Because sometimes the most ordinary nights can alter countless lives, and sometimes justice arrives, but far too late to change the outcome.